Hi World History, it's Mrs. Zimnick, and I'm going to give you some important information on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So we're going to focus most of our attention on about 1947 until around 2000. Understand, though, that this event stretches literally a couple hundred years for sure. Arguably goes back a couple thousand years. So this is why it's been so hard to get a lasting peace solution that everybody can agree upon. So we talked a lot about in class how right after World War I, the British got the mandate of Palestine, and in that Balfour Declaration they had promised that they would someday allow for a Jewish homeland to be there. And that was in 1922 with the Balfour Declaration. So World War II did a lot to really, I think, push this forward. And we also talked about in class how there was a great amount of guilt after World War II and after the Holocaust in the fact that Jewish people didn't have a safe homeland. So I think that's really part of the reason we're going to see UN resolution passed, 181 passed so quickly after World War II, 1947. And remember, World War II ends in... If you said 1945, you're right. So what this does is it officially partitioned, which means divided, Palestine into two separate countries. And you can kind of see here, Resolution 181, you've got the Palestine has basically lost all of this territory. And this is what the Jewish state was now becoming. So Jews, I think, around the world were really celebrating this. And for Palestinians, this was the beginning of the end of their country, and they were devastated by this news. So in 1948, this becomes official, and Israel is created, and there were still 1.5 million Palestinians that lived there who were obviously kind of scared and upset and wondered what would become of them and their country. So that's when we start to see the tension is going to grow, and Palestinians are going to organize themselves. By 1964, we'll see one of our major groups for Palestinian liberty called the PLO, and it stands for, as you can see, Palestinian Liberation Organization. Liberation means freedom. So there's one of their most well-known leaders, Yasser Arafat. He's going to be the guy we'll see pop up kind of all over the place here as we go through this. Here's the thing about the PLO. Depending on who you ask in Israel, they could either be considered a freedom-fighting group or almost a terrorist group. You know, I mean, for many Israelis, the PLO is the reason there was so much violence during the Intifada and the uprising and just standing in the way of peace. But for a lot of Palestinians, the PLO was a group that represented them and was finally getting some attention to their cause. So let's take a look at some of these acts of violence that are going to occur. One that definitely involves the United States here, we'll see the Six-Day War. And the Six-Day War in 1967 was when Israel launched a campaign to invade part of Egypt here in the Sinai Peninsula, and also part of Syria, the Golan Heights, and retake the West Bank and Gaza Strip and occupy that. So I put it doubled in size here in 6 short days. How is that possible? We'll make no mistake about it. They definitely had some help. The United States, since its inception, has been consistently backing up Israel. And so the United States, remember, was part of the driving force in the UN and the creation of Israel. And from the United States perspective, it was in our national security interest to have a strong Israel, and it still is today. So that's why our presidents have really supported Israel. But you can imagine what this is going to do to the Egyptians' feeling towards the United States and Syria's feelings towards the United States. It's going to go down, right? It's going to be negative. They're going to look at us as being the aggressor. So this is why we're going to see the PLO start to get more militant here. And in 1972, this is probably one of the most famous events where members of the Israeli track team, excuse me, and as you can see, there were a few other people as well who were killed by the PLO here at the Munich Olympics. So the Olympics tend to be an area that, you know, obviously the world is watching, the world's paying attention, and I think that's why the PLO felt like they needed to do this, because it would get some international attention to their cause. But obviously this is getting some negative attention to their cause, because people are going to see this and view the PLO as being unnecessarily aggressive. So that's going to be something that we'll see come out of that particular event. The Yom Kippur War was the following year in 1973, and this is when Egypt and Syria fought back against Israel. They picked the Jewish holiday of Yom Kippur. That was deliberate. They picked a holy day, just kind of to add insult to injury here. So Egypt and Syria fought to get back their lost territory that they lost in the 6 Days War. what we're going to see is be a major sort of event coming out of this is that the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, which is also known as OPEC, started a boycott of oil to any country that supported Israel. And that was really directed at the United States. And, well, what are the effects of this? This is going to be really, really, really a big deal in the U.S. It's going to lead to a massive oil crisis that's going to affect everything from, first off, gasoline. You can see we had cars look at how big these things are, right? They're not necessarily very fuel efficient. We were super reliant on oil. So we've got a gas shortage, but you got to remember, petroleum is used to heat our homes. It's used to light up our buildings. It's used to, all kinds of things, make plastics and other things. So this is going to set off kind of a chain reaction here that's going to lead to really massive inflation and unemployment in the 1970s. So this is something you'll see more of in U.S. history, but I had to at least mention that this was going on because what it's going to do is make the United States more determined to come up with some kind of a peace treaty, some kind of a deal. 1978, in the height of all the stagflation was the technical term for that, and the unemployment and the turmoil going on over in Israel and Palestine, President Jimmy Carter, who's seen right here, actually got a peace deal signed between Anwar Sadat, the leader of Egypt, and Menachem Begin over here, the leader of Israel, and this was called the Camp David Accords. So this is a pretty happy moment. You can tell by their faces, they look pretty excited. It looks like we're really going to make some headway here, and maybe we'll have some peace, but what ended up happening, and this is kind of the tragedy of anyone who tries to bring peace between Israel and Palestine or surrounding nations, I said in class, it's like they're putting a gigantic target on their back. So Anwar Sadat was assassinated in 1981 largely because of what he was doing by signing a treaty with Israel. People took it out on him. So it's going to be a pattern we're going to see, and it makes it really difficult to find people willing to come up with a peace deal. So as the PLO and Palestinians were really being kind of driven out of Israel, Israelis were building settlements in their former territories. We're going to see that a lot of the Palestinians are going to be forced to live in refugee camps in surrounding countries. And one of those countries is Lebanon. And in 1982, this event occurred, which definitely got condemnation by the United Nations. The UN said this was awful after the fact, unfortunately. But Christian militias, with using Israeli intelligence, entered a PLO refugee camp in Beirut, Lebanon, and killed somewhere between 762 people, and the numbers are as high as in the 3,000. It's really hard to tell the exact number because it depends on who you ask and what source you look at. But bottom line is, a lot of people were killed. We're talking children, women, elderly people. It's pretty awful, some of the atrocities that were coming out of this. So pretty inexcusable. And this is going to be another thing that we're going to see really just kind of embolden the Palestinians to say, you know what, enough is enough. And this is where we're going to see a few years later the period known as the uprising. It's called the Intifada. Intifada loosely translates to shaking off. So this is when we'll see Palestinians really try to just do what they could to get the Israelis out. In some ways it was more kind of nonviolent, like refusing to pay taxes, boycotting, but many did turn to violence, and there's going to be many people killed. And then the Israelis would, of course, retaliate in defense and go into Palestinian refugee camps and try to arrest people. And, in the confusion, often shots were fired, people are getting killed. So it's going back and forth, and it's just really causing devastation and a lot of turmoil here. So this is why we're going to see then some more renewed efforts as peace. The other thing that's created in 1987 is the founding of this group called Hamas. And Hamas is going to be made up of a lot of our former PLO members, actually, who are frustrated and are going to grow frustrated with the PLO's willingness to negotiate with both Israel and the United States. So Hamas is going to be kind of the more militant wing here. Hamas in 2011 praised Osama bin Laden as a, quote, great martyr. So that's going to be something that, of course, the United States is going to look down upon. And the U.S. really does not want to negotiate with Hamas at all. We do not view them as being a legitimate entity at all. So we are willing to work with the PLO, and that's what you're seeing here. We've got, let me get this thing out of the way. There we go. We've got President Clinton mediating between the leader of Israel, Yitzhak Rabin, and then there's Yasser Arafat representing the PLO right there. And in 1993, there was a pretty historic peace agreement signed that would eventually turn over gradual, what was called day-to-day authority to the Palestinians living in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. So not officially a country, which is ultimately what Palestine wants to see, but this was a definite step forward. And I don't think, many people ever thought in a million years they'd see those guys shaking hands. So this, again, it looked like, hey, maybe we're making some progress. And then here's what happened next. Yitzhak Rabin, the leader of Israel, was assassinated by an Israeli who basically said, how dare you sign anything with the PLO? So again, it's just a reminder that it's so hard to get leaders willing to do this and work for peace. Peace Now is a group of Jewish Israelis that was formed in 1977 and really does say, we believe in a peaceful solution and even a two-state solution. So there are some Israelis really willing to compromise, but there's a lot that really feel that they had to go through so much to get their homeland back that they don't want to compromise. They don't feel the need to give up, an inch here because of what happened during the Holocaust, what happened during the Russian pogroms in the 1800s, and then just the fact that they didn't have a homeland anywhere. So religion really does play a huge role here, and throw in the fact that the city of Jerusalem is also in Israel, which is, of course, very holy for 3 monotheistic religions, and it just makes it really, really, really hard to find a peaceful solution that everybody can agree upon. Bill Clinton made one last attempt here. This is the very end of his presidency. He had one more Camp David, where we had Ehud Barak meeting with, there he is again, Yasser Arafat of the PLO. But they weren't able to really come up with any long-term solutions there. So it's just a really, really difficult situation, and it's, I think, full of tragedy, full of history, goes back so long. And I said in class, when you ask the question, well, who should have Israel or who should have Jerusalem? Jews, Muslims, or Christians? I think the only answer you can really say is yes, which I know doesn't make any sense. But yes, because all 3 groups really have a legitimate claim and a historical claim to this land. So I sure hope in our lifetime we will see some kind of a solution. But hopefully now you kind of understand why it's been so difficult to get there. So this last slide here just kind of shows you, kind of outlines some of the more recent years of the conflict and a few of the things that we've been talking about. There's a historic picture right there of the Oslo Accords. And yeah, so like I said, I hope sometime in my lifetime or maybe yours we'll get there, but it's definitely been a long road. So I hope you understand this, and I will see you in class.